the concussion itself, and still this day, is not the problem. It is about care. Okay, there's a lot of things that umbrella care, and people could get confused by this. Listen, and to give a perspective, the leading cause of head trauma in the entire country is tripping and falling. The environment where that's probably going to happen, the most dangerous environment where that is probably going to happen, is in your home. Now, unless you have protocols and equipment in your home, well, your home is a much more dangerous place than sports are today because of protocols that are in place. Now, as far as they're executed, so I go back to what happened to me. What happened to me was a failure in care. I had a major head trauma on a Monday night in Kansas City. Now, here's the two signs of severity of head trauma, which are always misunderstood. I didn't lose consciousness, but losing consciousness is not a sign of severity. It's just a symptom of head trauma. And the reason, the best way to understand that, is once you regain consciousness, is losing consciousness a symbol, a sign anymore? No, you now have regained consciousness, so that's not a sign anymore. So how do we evaluate how severe you are? Cognitive recall and stability. Those are the two most important. And now there's a lot in cognitive recall and there's a lot in stability. Remember they used to go, hey, how many fingers? Okay, so now there's a whole battery of things because you got retrograde, anterograde and retrograde learning, the right lane, left, right, eyes, so there's a whole scope of things you need to go through from the cognitive and a whole slew of things from the physical. And those can be rehabbed and repaired and done properly, evaluated properly. Then you can return in a much safer environment than when you left it. It's when we return too quick or we don't remove ourselves quick enough. That is where our danger lies still today. Now, back then, clearly, you mentioned it, as a player, we had no idea about it. It's not what we had today. However, in 1994, it was still archaic to be cleared over the phone. Like, there's nobody that would have had knee surgery and the orthopedic doctor would have called up and said, hey, how's your knee doing? Go ahead and play. And that's basically what they did in the Kansas City game. Listen, I didn't know who I was or where I was for about 8 to 10 hours. Cognitive recall, as far as that time frame, that's significant. That's major, major trauma. That's severe. Shoot, by the time I got home into Chicago, I went and got an MRI. They lost me in the hospital, by the way, because I'd wandered up a couple floors. I was sitting in a waiting room waiting for them to find me, and it took them almost an hour to find me. They didn't realize I'd wandered off. So I was experiencing those things, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours later. They had to give me a ride. Eric Kramer took me home off the plane. They picked me up and brought me into the office. So that tells you that it's severe right there. So to get cleared over the phone 5 days later is just archaic. And that's ultimately what happened. And then I returned to play. I had a headache. I felt terrible. But I was just asked, hey, how do you feel? Now, my headache back then, I ain't even putting 2 and 2 together. Nor should I. Nowadays, you talk about you throw all these things out to players and help them understand. Isn't a headache if you feel slow, lethargic, all these things, giving you things to think about that you might, have bypassed. So we didn't have that. But I go back to getting cleared over the phone was just archaic. That never happened before. And I shouldn't have been back on a football field. And when I sustained severe concussion again later, about 5 weeks later, I went into cardiac arrest when I got in the locker room. In the process of them starting to do CPR on me, I actually started to breathe and I actually walked to the ambulance, but I was in intensive care for days. I learned how to read again. I went through severe depression. My career was over. I had no hope. I had no purpose. I was an utter mess and a train wreck. That's why I talk about mental health and aspects of it. I'm working on a new book called ACEs, Adverse Childhood Experiences, which we talk about emotional trauma is a bigger issue than physical trauma, and those things get confused. Symptoms can be very similar, but emotional trauma is a bigger issue in this country than physical trauma. And if you're going to rectify yourself, and this is about 99% true, there's always those unique cases where medication is going to be the primer thing that helps you. But in most cases, it is about emotion, I mean, your mental health starts with you. Okay. Like I was laying on a couch. I had no purpose, no hope. I had people calling me, leaving messages, trying to stop by the house. And it wasn't until I got up off the couch and realized I got to change things and I got to start doing things and I got to quit pointing fingers, casting blame, and making excuses. The second I did that, that is when things changed for me. And in most cases, that's the responsibility everybody has. Now, I'm not saying I did that and everything worked out all right. It was a 5-year journey. And there was a lot of things and people that helped me on the way, which you do need help on the way, but you have to take ownership of it to start it. And if you do that, that is when your progress will start, and that is when things will change, and that is when you will start to get better. Then you can get the help and hope that you're looking for. But if you never make the initial effort, if you do not make the initial steps, nobody can do it for you. And that's a critical step for everybody. And some of the best ways to evaluate how you are is just look at your overall routine. There's 3/3 to perfect health: nutrition, exercise, activity, you can put workplace in there, and rest. And if you look at that into your routine of your day, you could probably find out where you have some ruts, where you struggle. Every human being probably can find that out. Rest is a really big deal. If you're, say, working out right and eating right, but you're not getting any rest, and that can tear away at your life, regardless of how healthy you think you are by your nutrition and your exercise. Are you exercising? Is there activities? What kind of things are you doing, that make you and help you from a mental and cognitive aspect? What kind of foods are you putting into your body? All of those things, if you really evaluate, you could probably find out a majority of your issues. Now, are you willing to change and adjust and make the changes to change those things and to help you? It goes back to you again. And so that's the one thing we're, in a nutshell, doing with this book is trying to help people help themselves, give them things that will help them understand maybe why they do what they do, and then tools to help them work through that and navigate out of that into a healthier space.
Merril, as we round out your some of your more impactful life events. There was something that happened on Valentine's Day in 2003, and then on October 5th, 2015, if you don't mind sharing with the audience what those two things were.
Well, they're both of them have a darkness to them, and they're different. They're one of them is final, and the other one is a battle. So on February 14th, 2003, on Valentine's Day, my doctor called me to confirm I had a 3-pound tumor in my lower back. And he said, Merril, ironically, it's the size and shape of a football. And he said, it's malignant, and you're going to go through brutal chemotherapy. It's going to be like being run over with a Mack truck. We're going to do that, and we're going to give you 21 days to recover. And then we're going to have to do it up to 6 times for you. Could take up to a year to do it. And he said, you're going to be sick and tired. You're not going to play in that basketball league you've been doing. You're not going to feel like training. All the activities you're doing, you're not going to feel like doing that. And he said anywhere from 14 to 17 days after your first treatment, you'll probably start losing your hair, so you might want to think about shaving your head. But then what he said last was the thing that haunted me, and I just didn't shake. I couldn't shake. It was hard for me to shake. He said, I just can't guarantee what we're going to do will work for you. And he hung the phone up. I am still I'm telling you, I was chemotherapy and dying. I immediately put that in my head, and it was dark. I call it the dark days of diagnosis, because that was just the start of one of many days. But those words again actually would be reversed on me. My daughter actually shared after I got told that. I thought, well, I better get ahead of this. I go back to losing my parent, my mom. I just know that really haunted me, because I know how it affected me as a kid. And I'm like, man, my kids are 9 and 7. Right? So I shared with them what the doctor had shared with me. I went right back to that darkness of chemotherapy and dying. And I realized my daughter had worked way across the room, and she's the one that actually crawled up in my lap, because Find a Way is a parenting tool for me. My kids, they come in my office. They're like, hey, Dad, I want to do this. I go, well, let's find a way. What do you got to do, Bo? Sis, Corey, what do you want to do? How are you going to do this? What are you going to do? try to get them thinking about it. I'm not going to give them the answers. It's not my journey. I am not the one. So I always like to listen to what they think they need to do. Because if you get the person that's got to do it a part of the plan, they have a better chance of sticking with it. And so find a way is a very common for them to hear that. And so she actually come across the room, and gosh, it was so dark. I didn't realize she crawled at my lap, and she just put her little dainty arms around me, and she said, "Well, hey, Dad." And I finally looked at her, and she goes, "You better find a way." And it was like, whew, like those words again. I'm like, oh my gosh. I mean, it was from a 9-year old, and maybe if that said it from an adult, and maybe it's not the same, just resonated with me. It was like, oh my God. I'm like, those words again, man. I'm telling you what, the dying wasn't an option. Being sick and tired and laying on a couch feeling sorry for myself, not an option. Going bald was the only option that I was giving myself. And I'm like, I went in my office, tore down all my goals, and I wrote down one. I destroyed non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I helped myself up. I committed to it on that day. It picked the wrong guy. And my mindset changed. The second I created that mindset, man, everything shifted for me. My chemotherapy treatments, as brutal as they were, man, I plowed through them. I kept my routine like a lady strongly suggested I did, because I found out a lot about what other people had done or not done, and took their wisdom and applied it to my plan. And I went through the process. Now, what was interesting was I getting ready to do this treatment. I went in for a bunch of tests. I call it the dark days of diagnosis. I literally had a week of tests. And it was my last test that I was sitting in the waiting room to get my heart looked at. And it hit me. I was like, oh man, this is one of those mistakes. They think I'm getting heart surgery. I'm going through chemotherapy. So the nurse came out, and I shared with her. I said, I think there's a mistake. I go, I'm not here for my heart's not a problem. I got to go through chemotherapy. And she says, oh no, we're here. We got to check your heart, because what you're about to go through, we got to see if your heart will withstand what you're about to go through. And I was like, man, I was like, well, I only share that because after 5 years later, after all my treatments and my scans had been clean for 5 years, my doctor cleared me, but he said, hey, you have a defect in your aorta. And the defect in the aorta was from the red death that I had taken and had run through my veins and screamed through my body for nearly a year. It had taken a toll. And so I had to have open heart surgery from that to repair really a bubble, a weakness from that chemotherapy and what it had done. Because I remember the nurse walked in. She's holding the syringe with red fluid. She said, no, the nickname of this is Red Death. And we got to make sure you don't have a reaction to it, because if you do, we got to shut it down and attend to you right away. And other nurses started to walk in. And she said, we got to be careful. We don't want to get anything outside this syringe, because if we do, it could give you and I third-degree burns. And I didn't say it, but I was thinking, I'm like, well, wait a minute. If that's going to do on the outside, what's that going to do on the inside? And she hooked up to my right elbow, and she started to push. And I've never felt anything violate or scream through my veins quicker than on that day. It went from my elbow to my eyeballs to my lungs to my toes. It screamed through my body. And that's when I knew what I was up against. That's when I understood the brutality of that journey. And so when I was told both of those things, I thought cancer was, and it still is the most devastating thing I've ever heard, especially when I didn't know if the treatment would work. But when you have to get open heart surgery, and they have to have open heart surgery, they don't go in an angle here, an angle, and you're growing. They have to open you up. I mean, that's a big deal. And then all of a sudden you happen to hear all the things where it didn't go well, and then they never made it. And so you're like, geez, the day I pick, it could be the last day. And so that's not easy to pick a day. I obviously did. And, I'm grateful for investing in my health, because, chemotherapy, it took a toll on me. I will never deny that, but it interfered with my routine very little. I still played in a basketball league. I still trained. I still did what I would do with my kids every day. Open heart surgery, they said I would be out about 6 weeks. I was out 10 days. I got out of the hospital my day 5. I went and did a little workout. I started to rehab, and I was back to work in 2 weeks. So I'm grateful for those experiences. Don't want to do them again, but um, they when I speak, I always get to a point where I ask people, "Do you control your mind, or does your mind control you?" And I've had a litany of years where I've had to control my mind because every time you go to get a scan, I can let my mind race. Where is it going to go? Is it going to go? Oh my gosh, this is going to be. It's coming back. It's back. Or do I go back to what I trust? I go, my body feels great. I've done everything right, and so it's an exercise of controlling your mind. And those experiences have helped me harness that to be more in control of my thought process and what I do control, what I don't control. I've had a much better, I have a much better grasp of that and a much better power of that, than I had, 30 years ago. But people that can grasp that and learn that, anything is possible and they can accomplish anything. And that is a proven fact that when this tool works for you versus against you, there's nothing a human being can't do.